Welcome, welcome to Shelf Defiant. I am your disembodied narrator with a squeaky chair. I just hit my knee on my chair, my desk. All right, so we're gonna flip it up a little bit and we're gonna try to see if we can muddle through Pride and Prejudice by Jane Austen, illustrated by Hugh Thompson. I did do my best to find the illustrations that I'm seeing or that I will be showing on screen rather. Sorry, my brain is already shutting off knowing what's coming. Um, they're all found through Wikimedia Commons, so they're all copyright free images. There was one that I was unable to find, so sadly, I'll just have to describe it to you, I guess. So here, oh, I forgot, I didn't pull up the other one. Okay, so never mind, I couldn't find the chapter one image. All right, so look, I'm not a fan of Jane Austen. Okay, I've tried to read this book I don't know how many times now. So this is an appraisal. I am not. I am not a fan. I'm just gonna try to muddle through this. All right, so we have a preface by George Sainsbury, and it is in original handwriting, so it's hard to read. To, I believe it's an I, Compass car in acknowledgement of all I I'm not really sure, to his friendship and I don't know what that word is. Adire these illustrations are grateful. No clue what that last word is. Signed Hugh Thompson. All right, on to the preface. Okay, God, here we go. Ugh. So there's an illustration of three people sitting on what looks like a little hill, little grassy hill, looking over the grassy hillscape. There's some trees. It's black and white. Looks like there's a young person and an older gentleman and maybe I don't know, a teen girl or an older woman in a bonnet. I don't know. All right. To all of the Jane Austen fans, okay, um, I'm just gonna do my best, okay? There will be complaints and a lot of sighing. So I may not be the person you want to listen to. All right, so here we go into the preface. Oh, God. Walt Whitman has somewhere a fine and just distinction between loving by allowance and loving with personal love. This distinction applies to books as well as to men and women. And in the case of the not very numerous authors who are the objects of the personal affection, it brings a curious consequence with it. There is much more difference as to their best work than in the case of those others who are loved by allowance, by convention, and because it is felt to be the right and proper thing to love them. And in the sect, fairly large and yet unusually choice, of Austinians or Janites, there would probably be found partisans of the claim to primacy of almost every one of the novels. To some of the delightful freshness and humor of Northanger Abbey, its completeness, finish, and entrain obscure the undoubted critical fact that its scale is small and its scheme, after all, that of burlesque or parody, a kind in which the first rank is reached with difficulty. Persuasion, relatively faint in tone and not enthralling in interest, has devotees who exalt above all the others its exquisite delicacy and keeping. The catastrophe of Mansfield Park is admittedly theatrical. The hero and heroine are insipid. I just need to pause here and say, so is this preface. Already, I just want to not read anymore. Really? This is the longest paragraph ever. Okay, continuing on. And the author has almost wickedly destroyed all romantic interest by expressly admitting that Edmund only took Fanny because Mary shocked him, and that Fanny might very likely have taken Crawford if he had been a little more assiduous. Yet the matchless rehearsal scenes and the characters of Mrs. Norris and others have secured, I believe, a considerable party for it. Sense and Sensibility has perhaps the fewest out and out admirers, but it does not want them. Ugh, I don't want this. God, this is a mistake. Oh my god. This is just ridiculous. Okay, what does this have to do with this story? All right, continuing on. I suppose, however, that the majority of at least competent votes would, all things considered, be divided between Emma and the present book. And perhaps the vulgar verdict, if indeed of fondness for Miss Austen, be not of itself a patent of exemption from any possible charge of vulgarity, would go for Emma. It is the larger, the more varied, and the more popular. The author had, by the time of its composition, seen rather more of the world and had improved her general, though not her most peculiar and characteristic dialogue. Such figures as Miss Bates, as the Eltons, cannot but unite the suffrages of everybody. On the other hand, I, for my part, declare for Pride and Prejudice unhesitatingly. Well, then you're a fool. This is just horrific already. This is, and we're not even into the story. This is just the preface. Like, okay, continuing on. It seems to me the most perfect, the most characteristic, the most eminently quintessential of its author's works, and for this contention, in such narrow space as is permitted to me, I propose here to show cause. Why? Just get to the story. I can't really say that I read it without reading the preface, though. That just seems, I don't know, somehow unacceptable. I love reading, and I don't know why I felt I needed to punish myself for that love. This is just ridiculous. I don't know why I'm trying this again. Okay, here we go. In the first, this is still the preface, y'all. Sorry. In the first place, the book, it may be barely necessary to remind the reader, was in its first shape written very early, somewhere about 1796, when Miss Austen was barely 21. Though it was revised and finished at Taunton some 15 years later and was not published till 1813, only 4 years before her death. I do not know whether, in this combination of the fresh and vigorous projection of youth and the critical revision of middle life, there may be traced the distinct superiority in point of construction, which, as it seems to me, it possesses over all the others. The plot, though not elaborate, is almost regular enough for Fielding. Hardly a character, hardly an incident could be retrenched without loss to the story. The elopement of Lydia and Wickham is not, or Wickham, pretty sure it's Wickham, is not, like that of Crawford and Mrs. Rushworth, a coup de theatre. It connects itself in the strictest way with the course of the story earlier and brings about the denouncement with complete propriety. All the minor passages, the loves of Jane and Bingley, the advent of Mr. Collins, the visit to Hunsford, the Derbyshire tour, fit in after the same unostentatious but masterly fashion. There is no attempt at the hide and seek in and out business, which in the transactions between Frank Churchill and Jane Fairfax contributes, no doubt, a good deal to the intrigue of Emma, but contributes it in a fashion which I do not think the best feature of that otherwise admirable book. Although Miss Austen always liked something of the misunderstanding kind, which afforded her opportunities for the display of the peculiar and incomparable talent to be noticed presently, she has been satisfied here with the perfectly natural occasions provided by the false account of Darcy's conduct given by Wickham and by the awkwardness arising with equal naturalness from the gradual transformation of Elizabeth's own feelings. Ugh. From positive aversion to actual love, I do not know whether the all-grasping hand of the playwright has ever been laid upon Pride and Prejudice, and I dare say that, if it were, the situations would prove not startling or garish enough for the footlights. The character scheme too subtle and delicate for pit and gallery. But if the attempt were made, it would certainly not be hampered by any of those loosenesses of construction which sometimes, disguised by the convenience of which the novelist can avail himself, appear at once on the stage. This is just useless drivel. Who cares what this person has to say about anything? I feel like if this was, hold on a second. No, it just says illustrated by Hugh Thompson. And I'm terrified to scroll back up. I don't want to. Okay. If it was a woman giving this appraisal, I feel like it would have more gravity, in my opinion. I don't care what a dude thinks about it. This was a mistake. All right, back to it. I think, however, though the thought will doubtless seem heretical to more than one school of critics, that construction is not the highest merit, the choicest gift of the novelist. It sets off his other gifts and graces most advantageously to the critical eye, and the want of it will sometimes mar those graces. Appreciably, though not quite consciously, to eyes by no means ultra critical, but a very badly built novel which excelled in pathetic or humorous character, or which displayed consummate command of dialogue, perhaps the rarest of all facilities, would be an infinitely better thing than a faultless plot acted and told by puppets with pebbles in their mouths. And despite the ability which Miss Austen has shown in working out the story, I, for one, should put Pride and Prejudice far lower if it did not contain what seems to me the very masterpieces of Miss Austen's humor and of her faculty of character creation. Masterpieces who may indeed admit John Thorpe, the Eltons, Mrs. Norris, and one or two others to their company, but who, in one instance, certainly, and perhaps in others, are still superior to them. Oh my god, how much longer is this? Ugh. It goes on, and I really just should have skipped the preface. This is really, 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 really frustrating. And now I have to find my place. Sorry, bear with me. I gotta. Ugh. Oh my god, I don't even remember what I just read. Okay, there it is. The characteristics of Miss Austen's humor are so subtle and delicate that they are perhaps at all times easier to apprehend than to express, and at any particular time likely to be differentially apprehended by different persons. To me, this humor seems to possess a greater affinity on the whole to that of Addison than to any other of the numerous species of this great British genus. The differences of scheme, of time, of subject, of literary convention are, of course, obvious enough. The difference of sex does not perhaps count for much, for there was a distinctly feminine element in Mr. Spectator, and in Jane Austen's genius there was, though nothing mannish, much that was masculine. But the likeness of quality consists in a great number of common subdivisions of quality: demureness, extreme minuteness of touch, avoidance of loud tones and glaring effects. Also, there is in both a certain not inhuman or unamiable cruelty. It is the custom with those who judge grossly to contrast the good nature of Addison with the savagery of Swift, the mildness of Miss Austen with the boisterousness of Fielding and Smollett. Even with the ferocious practical jokes that her immediate predecessor, Miss Burney, allowed without very much protest, yet both in Mr. Addison and in Miss Austen there is, though a restrained and well mannered and insatiable and ruthless delight in roasting and cutting up a fool. A man in the early 18th century, of course, could push this taste further than a lady in the early 19th. And no doubt Miss Austen's principles, as well as her heart, would have shrunk from such things as the letter from the unfortunate husband in The Spectator, who describes with all the gusto and all the innocence in the world how his wife and his friend induced him to play at blind man's buff. Blah, 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 play at blind man's buff. But another Spectator letter, that of the damsel of 14 who wishes to marry Mr. Shapley, and assures her selected mentor that he admires your Spectators mightily, might have written by a rather more ladylike and intelligent Lydia Bennet, I'm not sure how to pronounce that, in the days of Lydia's great grandmother. While on the other hand, some, I think, unreasonably have found cynicism in touches of Miss Austen's own, such as her satire of Mrs. Musgrove's self deceiving regrets over her son. But this word cynical is one of the most misused in the English language, especially when, by a glaring and gratuitous falsification of its original sense, it is applied not to rough and snarling invective, but to gentle and oblique satire. I would just like to add, pause here for just a moment, that while cynical may have been misused, I feel like literally is now the forerunner in our current circumstances. All right, back to it. If cynicism means the perception of the other side, the sense of the accepted hells beneath, the consciousness that motives are nearly always mixed and that to seem is not identical with to be. If this be cynicism, then every man and woman who is not a fool, who does not care to live in a fool's paradise, who has knowledge of nature and the world and life, is a cynic. And in that sense, Miss Austen certainly was one. She may even have been one in the further sense that, like her own Mr. Bennet, she took an Epicurean delight in dissecting, in displaying, in setting at work her fools and her mean persons. I think she did take this delight, and I do not think it all the worse of her for it as a woman, while she was eminently the better for it as an artist. Oh, I need a break. This is just ridiculous. This person clearly just likes to hear themselves speak. I mean, I don't know what else you could possibly get from this. This is just, and again, I am humbly asking, who cares? Why is this individual giving us this diatribe about their own takes, their own vision, their whatever is happening right now to my eyes? I don't I don't understand. Okay. Ugh. All right, in respect, oh my God, this preface goes on and on and on. All right. In respect of her art generally, Mr. Goldwin Smith has truly observed that metaphor has been exhausted in depicting the perfection of it, combined with the narrowness of her field. And he has justly added that we need not go beyond her own comparison to the art of a miniature painter. To make this latter observation quite exact, we must not use the term miniature in its restrictive sense, and must think rather of Memling at one end of the history of painting, and Menessier at the other, than of Causeway or any of his kind. And I am not so certain that I should myself use the word narrow in connection with her. If her world is a microcosm, the cosmic quality of it is at least as eminent as the littleness. She does not touch what she did not feel herself called to paint. I am not so sure that she could not have painted what she did not feel herself called to touch. It is at least remarkable that in two very short periods of writing, one of about 3 years and another of not much more than 5, she executed 6 capital works and has not left a single failure. It is possible that the romantic paste in her composition was defective. We must always remember that hardly anybody born in her decade, that of the 18th century, 70s, independently exhibited the full romantic quality. Even Scott required hill and mountain and ballad, even Coleridge, metaphysics, and German to enable them to chip the classical shell. Miss Austen was an English girl, brought up in a country retirement at the time when ladies went back into the house if there was a white frost, which might pierce their kid shoes. When a sudden cold was the subject of the gravest fears, when their studies, their ways, their conduct were subject to all those fantastic limits and restrictions against which Mary Wollstonecraft protected with better general sense than particular taste or judgment. Miss Austen, too, drew back when the white frost touched her shoes, but I think she would have made a pretty good journey, even in a black one. For if her knowledge was not very extended, she knew 2 things, which only genius knows. The one was humanity, and the other was art. I'm sorry, the one was humanity, and the other was art. On the first head, she could not make a mistake. Her men, though limited, are true, and her women are, in the old sense, absolute as to art. If she has never tried idealism, her realism is real to a degree which makes the false realism of our own day look merely dead alive. Oh my God. Okay. Take almost any Frenchman except the late M. de Maspont, my apologies to the French language, and watch him laboriously, piling up strokes in the hope of giving a complete impression. You get none, you are lucky if, discarding two-thirds of what he gives, you can shape a real impression out of the rest. But with Miss Austen, the myriad trivial, unforced strokes build up the picture like magic. Nothing is false, nothing is superfluous. When, to take the present book only, Mr. Collins changed his mind from Jane to Elizabeth, while Mrs. Bennet was stirring the fire, and we know how Mrs. Bennet would have stirred the fire when Mr. Darcy brought his coffee cup back himself. The touch in each case is like that of Swift, taller by the breadth of my nail, which impressed the half reluctant Thackeray with just and outspoken admiration. Indeed, fantastic as it may seem, I should put Miss Austen as near to Swift in some ways as I have put her to Addison in others. This Swiftian quality appears in the present novel as it appears nowhere else in the character of the immortal, the ineffable Mr. Collins. Mr. Collins is really great, far greater than anything Addison ever did, almost great enough for Fielding or for Swift himself. It has been said that no one ever was like him, but in the first place, he was like him. He is there, alive, imperishable, more real than hundreds of prime ministers and archbishops, of medals, semi-medals, and distinguished philosophers. In the second place, it is rash, I think, to conclude that an actual Mr. Collins was impossible or non existent at the end of the 18th century. It is very interesting that we possess in the same gallery what may be called a spoiled first draught or an unsuccessful study of him in John Dashwood. The formality, the underbreeding, the meanness are there, but the portrait is only half alive and is felt to be even a little unnatural. Mr. Collins is perfectly natural and perfectly alive. In fact, for all the miniature, there is something gigantic in the way in which a certain side, and more than one, of humanity, and especially 18th century humanity, is Philistinian. I'm sorry, Philistinism. Its well meaning but hide bound morality, its formal pettiness, its groveling respect for rank, its materialism, its selfishness, receives exhibition. Maybe that's supposed to be Philistinism. Potato, potato. All right. I will not admit that one speech or one action of this inestimable man is incapable of being reconciled with reality, and I should not wonder if many of these words and actions are historically true. Wow, this pause again, this just makes me wonder how seriously this individual took himself. Like, oh my God, dude, find some elegant conciseness and land your plane, man. All right, back to it. But the greatness of Mr. Collins could not have been so satisfactorily exhibited if his creatress had not adjusted so artfully to him the figures of Mr. Bennet and of Lady Catherine de Bourgh. The latter, like Mr. Collins himself, has been charged with exaggeration. There is perhaps a very faint shade of color for the charge, but it seems to me very faint indeed. Oh my God, okay, even now I do not think that it would be impossible to find persons, especially female persons, not necessarily of noble birth, as overbearing, as self-centered, as neglectful of good manners, as Lady Catherine. 100 years ago, an earl's daughter, the lady powerful, if not exactly bountiful, of an out of the way country parish, rich, long. Oh, all right, just give me a second. All right, long out of material authority, I'm sorry, marital authority, and so forth, had opportunities of developing these agreeable characteristics which seldom present themselves now. As for Mr. Bennet, Miss Austen, and Mr. Darcy, and even Miss Elizabeth herself were, I am inclined to think, rather hard on him for the impropriety of his conduct. His wife was evidently, and must always have been, a quite irreclaimable fool, and unless he had shot her or himself, there was no way out of it for a man of sense and spirit but the ironic. Still not done with the preface, everyone. From no other point of view is he open to any reproach except for an excusable and not unnatural helplessness at the crisis of the elopement, and his utterances are the most acutely delightful in the consciously humorous kind, in the kind that we laugh with, not at, that even Miss Austen has put into the mouth of any of her characters. It is difficult to know whether he is most agreeable when talking to his wife or when putting Mr. Collins through his paces. But the general sense of the world has probably been right in preferring to the first rank his consolation to the former when she maunders over the entail. My dear, do not give way to such gloomy thoughts. Let us hope for better things. Let us flatter ourselves that I may be the survivor. And his inquiry to his colossal cousin as to the compliments which Mr. Collins has just related as made by himself to Lady Catherine. May I ask whether these pleasing attentions proceed from the impulse of the moment, or are the result of previous study? These are the things which give Miss Austen's readers the pleasant shocks, the delightful thrills, which are felt by the readers of Swift, of Fielding, and we may here add of Thackeray, as they are felt by the readers of no other English author of fiction outside of these four. Okay, pause. Well, just because you don't think any other authors are good enough is like, again, who cares, man? Oh, all right. Continuing on, the goodness of the minor characters in Pride and Prejudice has been already alluded to, and it makes a detailed dwelling on their beauties difficult in any space and impossible in this. Mrs. Bennet we have glanced at, and it is not easy to say whether she is more exquisitely amusing or more horribly true. Much the same may be said of Kitty and Lydia, but it is not every author, even of genius, who would have differentiated with such unerring skill the effects of folly and vulgarity of intellect and disposition working upon the common weaknesses of women at such different ages. With Mary, Miss Austen has taken rather less pains, though she has been even more unkind to her, not merely in the text, but as we will learn from those interesting traditional appendices which Mr. Austen Leigh has given us, in dooming her privately to marry one of Mr. Phillips's clerks. The habits of first copying and then retailing moral sentiments, of playing and singing too long in public, are, no doubt, grievous and criminal. But perhaps poor Mary was rather the scapegoat of the sins of blue stockings in that Fordyce belectured generation. It is at any rate difficult not to extend to her a share of the respect and affection and respect of a peculiar kind, doubtless, with which one regards Mr. Collins when she draws the moral of Lydia's fall. I sometimes wish that the exigencies of the story had permitted Miss Austen to unite these personages and thus at once achieve a notable mating and soothe poor Mrs. Bennet's anguish over the entail. The Bingsleys and the Gardiners and the Lucases, Miss Darcy and Miss Borough, I don't know how to say that. And normally I'd look it up, but I don't know if I can even make it through the preface. Jane Wickham and the rest must pass without special comment. Further than the remark that Charlotte Lucas, her egregious papa, though delightful, is just a little on the thither side of the line between comedy and farce, is a wonderfully clever study in the drab of one kind, and that Wickham, though something of Miss Austen's hesitation of touch in dealing with young men appears, is a not much less notable sketch in drab of another. Only genius could have made Charlotte what she is, yet not disagreeable. Wickham what he is, without investing him either with a cheap Don Juanish attractiveness or a disgusting rascality. But the hero and the heroine are not tints to be dismissed. Darcy has always seemed to me by far the best and most interesting of Miss Austen's heroes, the only possible competitor being Henry Tilney, whose part is so slight and simple that it hardly enters into comparison. It has sometimes, I believe, been urged that his pride is unnatural at first in its expression and later in its yielding, while his falling in love at all is not extremely probable. Here again, I cannot go with the objectors. Darcy's own account of the way in which his pride had been pampered is perfectly rational and sufficient. Sure it is. And nothing could be, psychologically speaking, a causa vera for its sudden restoration to healthy conditions than the shock of Elizabeth's scornful refusal acting on a nature ex hypothesi generis. Nothing in even our author is finer and more delicately touched than the change of his demeanour at the sudden meeting in the grounds of Pemberley. Had he been a big prig or a bad coxcomb, he might have been still smarting under his rejection or suspicious that the girl had come husband hunting. His being neither is exactly consistent with the probable feelings of a man spoilt in the common sense, but not really injured in disposition and thoroughly in love. As for his being in love, Elizabeth has given us okay. Let's just try that over. As for his being in love, Elizabeth has given as just an exposition of the causes of that phenomenon as Darcy has of the conditions of his unregenerate state. Only she has, of course, not counted in what was due to her own personal charm. The secret of that charm many men, and not a few women, from Miss Austen herself downwards, have felt, and like most charms, it is a thing rather to be felt than to be explained. Elizabeth, of course, belongs to the Allegro or Allegra division of the army of Venus. Miss Austen was always provokingly chary of description in regard to her beauties, and except the fine eyes and a hint or two that she had at any rate sometimes a bright complexion and was not very tall. We hear nothing about her looks, but her chief difference from other heroines of the lively type seems to lie first in her being distinctly clever, almost strong minded, in the better sense of that objectionable word, and secondly, in her being entirely destitute of ill nature, for all her propensity to tease and the sharpness of her tongue. Elizabeth can give at least as good as she gets when she is attacked, but she never scratches and she never attacks first. Some of the merest obsoletenesses of phrase and manner give one or two of her early speeches a slight pertness, but that is nothing, and when she comes to serious business, as in the great proposal scene with Darcy, which is, as it should be, the climax of the interest of the book, and in the final ladies' battle with Lady Catherine, she is unexceptionable. Then, too, she is a perfectly natural girl. She does not disguise from herself or anybody that she resents Darcy's first ill-mannered personality with as personal appealing. By the way, the reproach that the ill manners of this speech are overdone is certainly unjust, for things of the same kind, expressed no doubt less stiltedly, but more coarsely, might have been heard in more than one ballroom during this very year from persons who ought to have been no worse bred than Darcy. And she lets the injury done to Jane and the contempt shown to the rest of her family aggravate this resentment in the healthiest way in the world. Okay, we're almost there, everybody. We're so close to the end of this never ending preface. Still, as this does not explain her charm, which taking beauty as okay, hang on a second. Now Tosha's yelling right there with you, Furball. Yes, my love. All right. I'm so close to the end of this preface, so bear with me here. Okay, I'm just gonna start that over because I don't even know where I left off. Still, as this does not explain her charm, which taking beauty as a common form of all heroines may perhaps consist in the addition to her playfulness, her wit, her affectionate and natural disposition of a certain fearlessness very uncommon in heroines of her type and age. Oh, hold on one second. I realized I have milk up here. Oh, no, I don't. Okay. So you can't get out. Sorry, see, you can't have any chocolate milk. Okay. Nearly all of them would have been in speechless awe of the magnificent Darcy. Nearly all of them would have palpitated and fluttered at the idea of proposals, even naughty ones from the fascinating Wickham Elizabeth, with nothing offensive, nothing farraginous, nothing of the new woman about her, has by nature what the best modern, not new, women have been educated, have by education and experience. A perfect freedom from the idea that all men may bully her if they choose, and that most will away with her if they can. Though not in the least impudent and mannish grown, she has no mere sensibility, no nasty niceness about her. The form of passion common and likely to seem natural in Miss Austen's day was so invariably connected with the display of one or the other, or both of these qualities, that she has not made Elizabeth outwardly passionate. But I at least have not the slightest doubt that she would have married Darcy just as willingly without Pemberley as with it. And anybody who can read between lines will not find the lovers' conversation in the final chapter so frigid as they might have looked to the Della Cruskins of their own day, and perhaps do look to the Della Cruskins of this. All right, last paragraph in this. And after all, what is the good of seeking for the reason of charm? It is there. There were better sense in the sad mechanic exercise of determining the reason of its absence where it is not. In the novels of the last 100 years, there are vast numbers of young ladies with whom it might be a pleasure to fall in love. There are at least 5 with whom, as it seems to me, no man of taste and spirit can help doing so. Their names are in chronological order: Elizabeth Bennet, Diana Vernon, Armand Lavington, Beatrix Esmond, and Barbara Grant. I should have been most in love with Beatrix and Armand. I should, I think, for mere occasional companionship, have preferred Diana and Barbara. But to live with and to marry, I do not know that any one of the 4 can come into competition with Elizabeth. George Saintsbury. Well, George, great job on getting to the point after a very long, tiresome preface that probably should have been at the end of the book. Okay, now we are 20. Oh my God, we're 37 minutes in. That was just the preface. Oh, I might only be able to get through chapter 1 again. All right, here we go. Pride and Prejudice, chapter 1. So it's decorated with similar peacock feathers, as you see on the cover. So it's similarly decorated, but the peacock feathers come down, and then it just says chapter 1. Just explaining what I'm seeing here. All right. It is a truth universally acknowledged that a single man in possession of a good fortune must be in want of a wife. However little known the feelings or views of such a man may be on his first entertaining a neighborhood, this truth is so well fixed in the minds of the surrounding families that he is considered as the rightful property of someone or other of their daughters. Right. My dear Mr. Bennet, said his lady to him one day, have you heard that Netherfield Park is let at last? Mr. Bennet replied that he had not. But it is, returned she, for Mrs. Long has just been here, and she told me all about it. Mr. Bennet made no answer. Do not you want to know who has taken it? Cried his wife impatiently. You want to tell me, and I have no objection to hearing it. Okay, so now the scene is um, a nicely dressed dude, including the top hat, has just stepped out of his carriage, and there are about 4 horses kind of pulling sideways with their riders as he steps out to see whatever. Caption being, he came to see the place. This was invitation enough. Why, my dear, you must know Mrs. Long says the Netherfield is taken by a young man of large fortune from the north of England. That he came down on Monday in a chaise and 4 to see the place, and was so much delighted with it that he agreed with Mr. Morris immediately. That he is to take possession before Michaelmas, and some of his servants are to be in the house by the end of next week. What is his name? Bingley. Is he married or single? Oh, single, my dear, to be sure. A single man of large fortune. 4 or 5 4,000 a year. What a fine thing for our girls. How so? How can it affect them? My dear Mr. Bennet, replied his wife, how can you be so tiresome? You must know that I am thinking of his marrying one of them. Is that his design in settling here? Design? Nonsense. How can you talk so? But it is very likely that he may fall in love with one of them, and therefore you must visit him as soon as he comes. I see no occasion for that. You and the girls may go, or you may send them by themselves, which perhaps will be still better. For as you are as handsome as any of them, Mr. Bingley might like you the best of the party. My dear, you flatter me. I certainly have had my share of beauty, but I do not pretend to be anything extraordinary now. When a woman has 5 grown-up daughters, she ought to give over thinking of her own beauty. In such cases, a woman has not often much beauty to think of. But, my dear, you must indeed go and see Mr. Bingley when he comes into the neighborhood. It is more than I engage for, I assure you. But consider your daughters. Only think what an establishment it would be for one of them. Sir William and Lady Lucas are determined to go, merely on that account. For in general, you know, they visit no newcomers. Indeed, you must go, for it will be impossible for us to visit him if you do not. You are over scrupulous, surely. I dare say Mr. Bingley will be very glad to see you, and I will send a few lines by you to assure him of my hearty consent to his marrying whichever he chooses of the girls, though I must throw in a good word for my little Lizzie. I desire you will do no such thing. Lizzie is not a bit better than the others, and I am sure she is not half so handsome as Jane, nor half so good humored as Lydia. But you are always giving her the preference. They have none of them much to recommend them, replied he. They are all silly and ignorant like other girls, but Lizzie has something more of a quickness than her sisters. Mr. Bennet, how can you abuse your own children in such a way? You take delight in vexing me. You have no compassion on my poor nerves. You mistake me, my dear. I have a high respect for your nerves. There are they are my old friends. I have heard you mention them with consideration these 20 years at least. Ah, you do not know what I suffer, but I hope you will get over it, and live to see many young men of 4,000 a year come into the neighborhood. It will be no use to us if 20 such should come, since you will not visit them. Depend upon it, my dear, that when there are 20, I will visit them all. Mr. Bennet was so odd a mixture of quick parts, sarcastic humor, reserve, and caprice that the experience of 23 years had been insufficient to make his wife understand his character. Her mind was less difficult to develop. She was a woman of mean understanding, little information, and uncertain temper. When she was discontented, she fancied herself nervous. The business of her life was to get her daughters married. Its solace was visiting and news. I hope Mr. Bingley will like it. All right. Well, that's it. That's the end of chapter 1. I don't. Let me see how long chapter 2 is. Okay, well, they don't seem to be too long of chapters. Maybe I can make it through this time. All right, maybe it was just the preface that was so agonizingly painful. Okay, well, that's it for chapter 1. I have no idea when I will be actually reading this again. As I said, I'm not a fan of Jane Austen. Her books I just find dull and tedious. So, I mean, I am reading other books and they will take priority for sure. So thank you for joining me. I hope you found at least some of my complaining entertaining, and see you next time.